Are you ready? It's coast to coast, we're here and we representing Tom Joyner Foundation. We about to jump right in it. Everybody is woke. HBCUs, let's go. Tradition, trendsetting. Let's do it for the culture. HBCUbiquity.
Welcome to another episode of the Tom Joyner Foundation presents HBCUbiquity. I'm your host, Thomas Joyner Jr. Thank you for joining us on today. Question, especially if you're a parent or a grandparent, what's the best or safest or most practical way to plan for the future costs of paying for college? If you've been listening to this podcast, and you may recall that this is a topic that reoccurs frequently in these episodes. Whether we're talking about student loans or scholarships or grants or federal financial aid, the cost of attending college and how to pay for it is a frequent point of discussion on HBCUbiquity because, put simply, college costs more now than any other time in our history, and the costs continue to rise. So as we're in our third month of existence at HBCUbiquity, we've been blessed to have a wide variety of listeners from all across the country, and we could always use more. As you may have heard me mention on an earlier episode, this podcast is not just for HBCU students and alumni, but also for anybody that cares about what's going on in our colleges and our communities. And to that point, I found out a few weeks ago that a longtime friend of the foundation, Mr. Bob Cunningham, has been listening to our podcast, and he gave me a call and asked me if I ever consider talking about 529 plans, especially as a way to pay for college. I admit, while I've been familiar with 529 plans for the last 20 or something so years, I didn't really know much about them. And so Bob put me in contact with his wife, Miss Judy Cunningham, who's the PR manager of the 529 Ohio plan at College Advantage. And so we talked, and I thought this might be a good topic for us to talk about and share with you, our listeners, about yet another way to plan for the future cost of college, whether it's for your child or for your grandchild. But then I wanted to talk about this from the standpoint of an HBCU. And to the best of my knowledge, the one person that I really want to talk about this with is Dr. John Rudley, former president of Texas Southern University and former accountant by training. I want to talk to him about how 529 plans both affect colleges, and not just to hear from somebody that, is associated with the 529 plan, but to hear from somebody who has actually worked with them on the other side. Does this work for students? Do these work for parents? And are they the best way to pay for college if you want to support your alma mater or your favorite HBCU? Dr. Rudley, for those who do not know, is a very interesting man with a lot of background, a lot of knowledge about HBCUs. And as we were talking, as you will hear, our conversation ended up expanding a lot more past 529 plans. Our conversation expanded to some of the other current topics and trends and discussion points going on in the HBCU space about how to pay for college, the cost of college, and other issues, so to speak, that relate to the core topic of how to finance public education, or better yet, how to finance college education. Even though this episode today is about 529 plans, we're going to be talking about, like I said, a lot of different topics that relate to HBCUs and to higher education in general. We would love to hear from you on social media about your thoughts on these. Do you have experiences or testimonials about 529 plans that you'd like to share with us? Or better yet, do you have an opinion or a comment about some of the other topics that we discussed in this episode that you want to share with us? By all means, hit us up at HBCUbiquity, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all social media platforms. That's spelled HBCUbiquity. Thanks for joining us, and let's get started. Welcome to HBCUbiquity.
Let's take a quick break and learn about one of the Tom Joyner Foundation scholarship programs that helps students at historic Black colleges and universities. Here's an example of the Tom Joyner Foundation's success.
Hi, my name is Sidonia Cherie Thomas, a freshman biology major from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I am extremely honored and grateful to receive this scholarship as I pursue my studies at Tougaloo College. I would like to personally thank the Washington, D.C. Alumni Chapter, the Tom Joyner Foundation, and my parents, Milo and Jacqueline Thomas.
To donate to the Tom Joyner Foundation, just log on to www.tomjoynerfoundation.org, and you can help a student continue their education at a HBCU.
Welcome back to HBC Ubiquity. This is Thomas Joyner Jr., and I'm joined now by Miss Judy Cunningham, the PR manager for Ohio's 529 plan College Advantage. Miss Cunningham, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. And how are you?
Doing well. So, Ms. Cunningham, for the benefit of our listeners, can you please explain what 529 plans are and how they work?
A 529 plan is simply a way that a family saves for college. We had hoped when these programs were first created that when someone heard the words or the numbers 529, it would become just like when you say 401k. And probably that's the best way to equate what a 529 is. It's a means of saving for future college or future post-high school educations. Every state, with the exception of Wyoming, has a 529 plan. Some states have more than one plan because there are several different types of plans that a state may manage. And the majority of 529 plans are associated with the state treasurer's office. In Ohio, we are a part of the state, but we are a standalone agency. So it just really depends on where you live as to what type of plan. But the whole idea is that these plans are named 529 because it was part of Section 529 of an Internal Revenue Code that became law. But the whole idea behind these plans is to help families who fall into that middle class who aren't going to always get all of the financial aid in the forms of grants that may be available. And so to keep us from taking out numerous loans, 529 plans were created to help us have some type of systematic way of saving for higher education.
So with that said, if the 529 plans are managed by most state treasuries, that means they're managed by public officials and not by private entities.
Correct. As I said, most of them are associated with a state agency like the Treasury's office, or they can be associated with an institute of higher learning. There is, along with all of the 529 plans in every state, there is a private 529 consortium, and this is a consortium of private colleges throughout the United States that manage their own 529 plan.
And for the purpose of, like you were saying, middle class people and those above and below that economic threshold, which would you say is the more safer 529 plans? Those managed by private institutions or those managed by public entities, so to speak?
Well, I think all of them are safe. It's just a matter of what your preference is. People who may be alumni of a private institution may choose to go that route. But for the majority, we choose to look at what our state offers because our states who are offering these 529 plans offer you tax advantages that don't come with regular savings vehicles. And that's the beauty behind 529 plans. Someone can say, well, I can put my money in a bank and in a savings account. And yes, you can. But the difference is 529 plans are tax-free. They are after taxes when you put your money in, but when you pull your money out, you're not paying taxes on your earnings. And so that makes it different from when you put your money in just a regular savings account. So the whole idea is that states offer some tax benefits with 529 plans that you don't get with a regular savings system.
So they're kind of like capital gains in terms of being safe from being taxed.
Exactly. The caveat to that is that as long as they're used for some type of higher education,
right,
you can withdraw your money at any time. But when you do and you don't use it for higher education means you are going to pay taxes on your earnings. And this is the government's way of not allowing individuals to use 529 plans as mechanisms just to make money.
Right. Understood. And so how did the first 529 plan investments keep up with the increases in tuition costs over the last, say, 10 to 15 years?
Well, when these programs first started in the early 90s, a lot of states had what we call prepaid tuition plans, and those were the original plans. And those plans were based on what's called the weighted average of the public schools in the state in which they were created. And so these were programs where you basically decided that you wanted to try to prepay a certain amount of higher education. So for instance, in the state of Ohio, originally we had a prepaid plan. And if you were looking to pay maybe a year's worth of tuition, 2, 3, 4, whatever the case may be, that's what your plan was. And that's where you put a certain amount of money in the program. Some states were contract states, others weren't. But the one common denominator is that in the prepaid tuition plans, the original 529 plans, these plans are backed by what's called the full faith and credit of their given state. And so what that simply means is that with the rising cost of college, if there are so many kids who have accounts in these plans and the money should run out, the state then steps in and makes up the difference. And so that's how the original plans are able to keep up with kids who are going to school whose parents may have planned and saved from them 18, 15 years from now. What a lot of states have done since the beginning of these programs and with the rising cost of a college education is they have probably closed those programs. That's not saying they aren't servicing and keeping their promise that they made to the children whose parents enrolled them in the prepaid plans, but they aren't allowing new dollars and new accounts to be open. And so many states have done just like we've done in the state of Ohio, and they've created the Savings 529 plans, which are market-based investments. And again, the easiest way to understand them is they are the 401ks of higher education.
So coming back to Savings 529 plans in a quick second, the original 529 plans, if I hear you correctly, all of the risk was on most of the risk was on the state.
Correct.
Or the public entity. And so so I'm a little unclear, how do the original 529 plans differ from what you just said were savings-based 529 plans?
Because the original programs, the prepaid plans, they had the backing of the full faith and credit of their states. The savings plans, as I mentioned, are mutual fund or are market-based investments. And so it's just like they're mutual funds that you're investing in. There's certain funds that have been selected specifically for higher education savings. And so being market-based, you could lose money, you'll gain money. In 2008, that was probably the worst year for 529 plans all over the country because we lost money, but we regained it and the market rebound. And so the money has come back, the money has continued to grow, and kids are still going to school. But with the original program, as you said, the onus of the program fell on the states or the entity that managed those or supervised those programs.
Wow. Okay. So if I'm to read and believe all that I'm seeing about the market these days, that may be a little risky.
As I said, 2008, when the market was going through a lot, it was very risky. But I myself have 2 children who were in the plan. When I read my statements, wasn't the best year we had, but we did rebound, and the program has done very well. And those programs around the country are doing very well because more and more people are starting to put their money in these plans because they're earmarked for higher education. Individuals are feeling as if they need a venue to use to help them save because we know our kids are just graduating with unbelievable amounts of debt.
Yeah. And
trying to find some way to save 529 step up and make that happen.
So, Ms. Cunningham, what else can you say then to listeners who may be a little on the fence now, knowing that a savings-based 529 plan, like that, a lot can happen in the market between now when the baby's born and when the baby's ready to go to college. how else can you convince listeners today that these are investment tools worth considering for the next 15 to 20 years, so to speak?
Well, the nice thing about it is the idea is long-term saving and planning. And so individuals who start like I did when their children are young, babies, as you say, have a longer period of compound earning and growing. And so we feel pretty confident that by the time they're ready to go to school, we're going to have more in these programs than we put into them originally.
Ms. Cunningham, my last question is, how much longer do you anticipate 529 plans being made available to the general public?
529 plans aren't going anywhere. Just within the last 2 years, Congress made a change with these plans, and they also now allow families to use 529 plans for private schools. So if you have a child or a family who has children who go to parochial schools, Christian schools, some type of private school where there is a tuition, you can also use your 529 for that. And because you can use 529s for, in regards to higher education, all of your higher education qualified expenses, we don't see these programs going anywhere anytime soon. We do see more families learning more about them and putting more money into the programs.
Every state except for Wyoming?
Every state except for Wyoming, but residents of Wyoming can pick and choose other plans. And that's the beauty about 529 plans. 529 plans, the savings plans, are pretty universal. And by that, what I mean is that I can live in Ohio, but should I like, let's say, the state of New York's plan better because I like the investment options that they use, I can very well put my money in New York's plan, and my child can still live and be a resident of Ohio, and vice versa. So it really depends on the investment options that a program offers as to if people outside of the state will participate in it. The one thing we always warn people about, though, is first look at your own state plan, because you want to make sure you're getting all of the tax advantages, and you only can get those tax advantages when it's your state plan. The state of Ohio doesn't give the same tax deductions to residents who live out of the state. And so you want to look at your state's plan first to make sure you're getting the most out of your state plan. There are some plans that have what we call tax parity, and they offer the same tax benefits regardless of who participates in the program and where you live. And so there is a lot of research that individuals need to do when they start thinking about participating in these programs. But the idea, as I said earlier, is to help them not have all of these thousands of dollars of debt. And if you can get on a systematic way of saving for your child through your employer, automatically through your checking or your savings account, whatever you can do to add to your expected family contribution is going to be a plus when it's time for your child to go to college.
Well, Ms. Judy Cunningham, thank you very much for this knowledge and information that you shared with us today about 529 plans. I didn't know a lot of this, and I'm willing to bet that many of today's listeners did not know about this either. So again, on behalf of HBCUbiquity, thank you very much for this.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Let's take a quick break and learn about one of the Tom Joyner Foundation scholarship programs that helps students at historic Black colleges and universities. Here's an example of the Tom Joyner Foundation's success.
Hi, my name is Sonia Fry. I'm a senior business major from Detroit, Michigan. I would like to thank this university and the Tom Joyner Foundation for the scholarship. Upon completing my degree, I plan to hit the ground running to get into the music industry. Thank you so much, Tom Joyner Foundation. I really appreciate it.
To donate to the Tom Joyner Foundation, just log on to www.tomjoynerfoundation.org, and you can help a student continue their education at a HBCU.
Welcome back to HBCUbiquity. I'm joined now by the former president of Texas Southern University and longtime friend of the Tom Joyner Foundation, Dr. John Rudley. How's it going, Dr. Rudley?
We're great down here in Texas. How are you?
Doing well. And I'm here in Texas, too. I'm in Dallas. It's about 100 and some degrees right now.
Well, we're near the coast in Houston, so we're a little bit hotter than you, I think.
All right. Well, Doc, let's talk about the 529 plans from the perspective of colleges. So when a student applies their 529 plan to attending a college or university, does a college receive the same financial benefits as it would if the student was, say, paying outright without aid or scholarships?
Oh, sure they do. I mean, universities receive tuition for students from private sources, from endowments, and they also receive from student financial aid, or these 529 programs are just another way of providing resources for the university. So it doesn't make a difference to the university. They like to have as many students as possible paying tuition.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other benefits, such as tax benefits or rebates that a college can receive when costs are paid for through the redemption of these 529 plans?
It's really not geared toward the college. It's for a parent or grandparents who are staring at tuition costs. I did a quick calculation for a 4-year school. For example, if you have a child who's going to go to school, it's going to cost about $87,000 for a 4-year in-state student. It's going to cost about $153,000 at the end of 4 years for an out-of-state student. And if your student is going to go to a private institution, it's going to cost about, over 4 years, about $200,000. The question is, how do you come up with the savings that would meet those cost expectations? And that's where the 529 program come in. And what you're doing is setting up a savings plan. And what the IRS is going to do is you're going to put money into these accounts, and that's after-tax money. Okay, it's already been taxed. You might get it from your salary or wherever.
Okay.
But you put it in a savings account, and then some brokerage firm invests it for you, or the state invests it, and the interest earned on that is not taxed. And so if that fund earns interest over a period of time, say from the child when they're 1 year old to 18 years old, that interest is not taxed. Okay, so when the interest and the contributions are distributed to the student, that there's no taxation on the interest that's accumulated. So from the parent standpoint, it's a way of putting a savings fund together and having the interest not taxed. Now, if you didn't have this program, you'd have a tax in the interest.
But are the principal funds, exposed at all by the fluctuations of the market, especially if they're market-based?
Absolutely. I mean, all these programs are one where the states have these programs. You have to check on what state you're in. Mm-hmm. And you can utilize any of the state's program, 529 programs. But it's up to the state's investment managers to be able to put those funds together to be able to come up with accumulated income over that period of time. That's why you can use, some states have funds, and then brokerage firms have funds as well.
And for listeners that may not be aware, Dr. Rudley is traditionally an accountant by training. So that's why he's a good man to talk to about these kinds of numbers. So it sounds like, Dr. Rudley, that you would recommend these to like you said, parents and grandparents.
Yeah, if you're going to save money for your for the future, this is one way. I mean, you could save it without these programs, but at least you might as well go ahead and dive into these programs and get that deferred tax on the earned interest that is accumulated in those funds. If you didn't, you'd be paying taxes on the interest on those funds. Mm-hmm. Hey, you can really, I think there's a $15,000 annual gift tax exclusion. If you're married, it's a $35,000 gift tax exclusion. So you can put in money, depending if you're single or married, up to $15,000 a year, or $35,000 if you're married. So you can see if you have enough money over time, you can meet those college cost expectations, which are growing. I said before, you're looking at about $153,000 if you're an out-of-state student going to a public institution. Or if you're going to a private institution, you're looking at about $200,000 for a kid's education over 4 years.
And so with that said, now while we're talking about paying for college, Dr. Rudley, I'm sure that you've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years that there are some states that have started to introduce various forms of free community colleges and or free 4-year institutions. So what are your thoughts on these efforts?
Do you remember the Georgia Hope Scholarship?
Yes, I do.
And Florida had a scholarship as well back in the day. I mean, these we're talking about maybe in 2000, 2001. And Georgia found out that the Hope Scholarship was offered to all the students that their whole expectation in the Hope Scholarship was to keep their students in their state rather than having students going out of state, getting an education and not coming back. So the motivation for Georgia was to keep their intelligence in their state. So Florida did the same thing, keep the best and brightest. So there has been a history where when states decide to fund these types of programs, they've been pretty successful. The Georgia Hope Scholarship, I don't know what the conditions are of the program now, but I think it's still in existence, as well as the Florida Scholarship. So other states can use state appropriations to come up with scholarship programs.
Okay, because I was referring to, the ones that come to my mind immediately are like, the free community college, situation in Tennessee right now, as well as the fact that graduates from the state of Delaware can now go to schools like Delaware State for 4 years free, as long as they are a Delaware resident. And it makes a lot of sense when you put it from that perspective about retaining this in-state talent in that state.
Yeah, I remember that. I used to work in Tennessee. I was the CFO for the Board of Regents when it had 26 institutions, and that state decided to come up with additional revenues for the programs, and it was under hot competition from Georgia, because Tennessee was right next to Georgia, and if Georgia's going to start a program where it's going to allow students to go to college free, then that put pressure on the other states around Georgia to do the same thing. So that's why Florida had to do it, and so Tennessee came up with a program. I think you'll see a replication of these programs. Remember now, all the funds for these scholarship programs, when people say we're going to make tuition free for students, somebody's got to pay for that.
Right.
And typically, over time, the states have always subsidized public school education. So when a student paid certain tuition, say 15 years ago, the state was subsidizing universities to the tune of maybe 80%, and the students were providing tuition 20%. Now, fast forward to today, it's the reverse. With the downturn in states' appropriations, right? They have expected students to pay a higher share of their education. So philosophically, when you go to a state legislature, you have a big battle in the legislature about who benefits from higher education. Does the student benefit? Yes. Then some legislatures say, well, if the students benefit, then they should pay more. So over time, you've seen this shift of the cost of education going from a public subsidized appropriations by the state legislature to tuition increases up to about 26% over the years. And that's why you also have seen, for example, in Georgia, they passed a lottery, and they dedicated the lottery to funding education, and that's where they got their funds to do it. I believe South Carolina and some other states were considering doing lotteries as well. So if you see lotteries going up, a lot of times those lotteries were approved based on the promise that the legislatures would use some of the resources to fund education.
That happened here in Texas.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Now, there's always a stipulation. You have to have, if you're going to pass any kind of pari-mutuel betting or any kind of lottery program, you better say it's going to be helping education. Otherwise, the public won't vote for it.
Well, Doc, there's a lot to unpack in that answer that you just provide about the states and all. So I want to start with what you were saying about the 80-20 rule basically being flipped on its head in the last 20 years or so. So when you take into account private schools, especially private HBCUs, and right now I'm thinking about Morehouse College with 400 graduates having over $40 million or around $40 million in debt from the initial reports. Does these situations, lend itself to a situation where you have students at HBCUs that are, accumulating so much debt now just for an undergraduate education?
Well, we're going to have a debate about that. Most of the HBCU students, about, I'd say 70% receive federal financial aid anyway. So many of the low-income students are receiving enough to go to college. The middle income, however, students whose parents make over a certain amount, those are the parents that are kind of suffering in terms of not having access to additional funds. So that at the end of the day, it may not be that you'll have that much of a negative impact on HBCUs, because if you look at the amount of financial aid that these students are receiving is quite substantial as it is.
Okay, so another part I wanted to talk about from your from that answer you provided, a little bit earlier was you're talking about state legislatures, and there's another topic that I want to get your thoughts on. That is the current merger proposal that will be reintroduced in the next legislature session in Georgia to spin off Albany State, Savannah State, and Fort Valley State into their own system instead of remaining in the university system of Georgia. So with you having been basically on both sides of that fence in your own HBCU system, as well as part of, a bigger system in Tennessee, what are your thoughts about, this topic?
Well, when I was at the Tennessee Board of Regents, we had Tennessee State was in the system. And moving here to Texas, Texas Southern being the president, I can see how an independent institution has to deal with the legislature. So Tennessee State was in the Tennessee Board of Regents system, and we went to bat for Tennessee State like we would go for the University of Memphis or Austin Peay or East Tennessee, et cetera. So being in the system has its advantages. As I look at the issue with the merger of those schools, apparently you have to really look at why it will be proposed. And it's proposed because the states have formulas for funding. Funding formula is based on enrollment. And so one of the key issues in that legislature was the fact that both institutions, when all three institutions, is it 3 or 4, when you put them together, they only have 12,000 students.
Okay.
And the formulas don't really work for institutions until you have over 10,000 students. It's kind of the law of large numbers. And most of these formulas were developed based on enrollment because the big land grant institutions were the ones sitting at the table developing the formula. So in Texas, the University of Texas and Texas A&M would be at the table with the coordinating board deciding on a formula. In Georgia, the same. The University of Georgia has a lot of clout in those folks. So when they develop a formula, of course, it's going to be one that's geared toward large institutions. So what happens when you get that kind of intellect into the room? They develop a formula for large institutions, which leaves the small institutions out. So that's why I'm telling you, if you have less than 10,000 students, the formula is not really going to work for you, and you're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I can see where some legislators are trying to say, well, if you put them all together, there'll be over 10,000, there'll be 12,000 students. And one of the rationale, it seems to me, is that they're trying to get the formula to start to work for these institutions. The problem is this: you got 3 different institutions. Is it 3 or 4? Is it 3?
It's 3.
3 institutions. So if you merge them, what you're trying to do is get after some of the key problems. And that one is the size. 2 is, I don't know if anybody really looks at the graduation statistics, the 6-year graduation rates, but there are a lot of performance indicators as well. And so if those institutions have low 6-year graduation rates or low 4-year graduation rates, that is one of the other discussions they're having about, well, how do we fix these schools? Because at the end of the day, all the schools should be concerned, as in my opinion, from being a system administrator in both Tennessee and at the University of Houston, you're concerned about the quality of your academic programs and the quality of the students that are coming here. So these are the kind of things when you go to the legislature and you have a hearing, the first thing they ask you about is what's your size and how are your students performing? What's your 6-year graduation rate? What's your 4-year graduation rate? And what are you going to do about those graduation rates if they're not up there? So that starts a conversation, I'm sure, in Georgia about, well, how do they fix the problem with those 3 institutions? One, how do you get the enrollment above 10,000 students? And 2, how do you improve the academic performance of students? Because if the board at those 3 institutions aren't making the presidents more responsible for the academic performance, they're going to be running into this negative roadblock in the legislative capitals about, well, you guys are not graduating enough students, so why should we pay that much attention and why should we keep sending resources to you? So I would ask a lot of the alumni of those institutions to ask their board and ask the president, what's the 6-year graduation rate? What's the 4-year graduation rate? And what's the strategic plan for enrollment increases? But I think putting all 3 of them together is just a simplistic way to do it. It's not necessary to put all 3 of them together, in my opinion. But systems work. But I really I don't understand if they're already in the system, why are they trying to pull them out and make a separate system out of them? That, to me, that seems a little bit a little devil in the details there.
Yeah, but it's interesting when you put it from the perspective of, not putting words in your mouth, but best use of public dollars.
Yes, exactly. We all have to be responsible for that.
Yeah.
Every institution, HBCU or predominantly white institution, has to really be confronted with what the outcomes are of the resources that are invested by the state. And as I said before, these states will fund education, and they're going to fund education for a reason. And that reason is they want an educated population to stay in their state.
Right. Dr. Rudley, now that debate season is already upon us, throwing a little bit of politics in here right quick. These candidates have started talking about ways to combat student debt, including reducing and/or forgiving all outstanding debt, all outstanding student loans. In your opinion, is that even feasible or possible?
Well, I work for the Department of Education under Secretary Alexander in '91, and these debates are always out there. We're looking at the debt the students have, and it's kind of a two-pronged sword because you got some students who are getting huge debts, and they're choosing academic programs that won't end up paying for the kind of they need to have. For example, I don't mean to disparage any career, but people who have liberal arts degrees, for example, they find it harder to get a job in the business world, for example. So you really have to, when somebody says, well, I've got all this debt and I can't pay for it, somebody should ask, well, what area of study did you choose? Because if you chose an area of study that really wasn't going to give you the kind of return on investment, that's kind of a decision that you made. So, when students steer away from the STEM program and the business program, they say, well, I don't want to take these hard courses. I mean, we all know as parents, we got to kind of force them into areas where they will be able to get a decent career when they leave college. Instead of, saying, well, someone should have told me, about this area or that area. Because a lot of times students change their minds 6 times before they graduate.
Yeah.
Parents and students really have to get a grip on that. So when the person says, I got all this debt, you have to ask them, what area of studies did you choose? Did you change your major 6 times? Because, every time you change your major, right?
Yep.
You drop some courses and you have to add courses to get back on that track.
Yep.
So when students are not thinking clearly or they're not getting good advice, their cost of education is going up because they're adding more credit hours. For example, I saw a study where the traditional students in Texas graduated with 127 hours. And some of the HBCUs, they were graduated 157 hours. And I see the extra hours that they're taking, and that cost goes up every time you change your major. So if you're changing your majors, you're adding a cost.
Yeah.
And then when you say, well, I've got all this debt, you got to look at the decisions that were made that resulted in that debt. But at the end of the day, let me say this. All the states can provide resources, whether it's forgiveness of debt or Hope scholarships or scholarships in Georgia, if the state has the will, because I think many of them have the resources. But over time, what has taken away from college funding at state level has been medical bills, highway funding. Those issues have really taken the place of education. So 20 years ago, when education was being funded, you see now the shift in the state's resources going toward health benefits and highways. Everybody likes roads and highways, but you know how much those things cost? And when you look at how much the states are paying for the 4 or 5 services that they provide, education has moved down the line to about 6, 7, or 8. So if there's additional resources, whether it's through additional resources coming in from a lottery or whatever, they can apply those additional resources and get education back in the game and fund anything they want to fund. I think at, for example, Baltimore, Morgan State.
Yeah.
They have some great facilities now. And you look at the state was pushed through litigation, desegregation litigation.
Yeah.
And if you go on Morgan State's campus, and I visited that campus, they have a wonderful library, student center, and they got 5 buildings that institution received. Because of the way the state funded buildings, they put all the universities on a strategic 5-year plan, and you had to put your buildings down on a list. And when the state had money, it would fund all the way down that list. So Morgan State the state would always lose. They wouldn't lose. They would run out of money before they got to Morgan State historically. But when the legislation hit them, the states put Morgan State in a priority, and so Morgan State started getting the buildings it should have gotten 10 years ago. So that's my indication of how you have to have the legislative will, and you have to have people up there lobbying for HBCUs to be able to get the kind of resources they need.
Dr. Rudley, I was talking earlier on another episode about the Ayer settlement in Mississippi with Dr. Bynum at Jackson State, and he was echoing that same sentiment that you just said about not so much the legislature, but the lobbying, especially on behalf of alumni, to hold the legislature accountable and to demand what's righteously theirs. That's true, and I would agree with him. One thing that I noticed when I worked with primarily white institutions, we had a pretty cracked lobbying structure. We had people who were dedicated 100% to making sure the president got in front of the key legislators in the House and the Senate. A lot of the legislators too in some of these major land grant institutions, their graduates are the ones who are up in the legislature. People who graduated from the University of Texas, you run into them all day up in the House. And so any other state, when you go to Georgia, when you go to legislature, you're going to run into a bunch of University of Georgia graduates. So they said, come on in if you come there trying to get resources for University of Georgia, University of Texas, come on in. But when it comes to HBCU, and we don't have that kind of, influence, we'll say, how much time can we devote to you? Because we only got 5 minutes. Let's hear what you have to say. So that's kind of how you have to work on this legislative lobbying piece year round, and not just for the term of the session. I do believe in systems. I believe Tennessee State is a much better institution because it's in the Tennessee Board of Regents system. And I believe Prairie View is in a much better state because it's in the Texas A&M system. So I am one that believes that a system, and as a system executive too, I was a CFO for the Tennessee Board of Regents and at the University of Houston. We had to work on behalf of all of our institutions. And so I think when you're in a system, you do have the muscle that you don't have as an independent HBCU that you would have as though you were the system. So I believe, I believe in the system approach, and I think in the long term, I think all the HBCUs that are not in a system should be in a system. Well, Dr. Rudley, and for those that do not know, every time I talk with this man, there's always lots of knowledge to come out, lots of jewels, lots of perspectives that may or may not have been considered. But Doc, before I let you go, I got one more quick question, and I hate to put you on the spot, but I know how much you follow college sports. Do you have any SWAC predictions for this season, football?
Well, you got your perennial favorites in there, and you always can, in football, you can always expect Grambling and Alcorn to show up, Prairie View show up, and hopefully Texas Southern will start to get back to the good old days when we were about 8-9 years ago when we were successful in the program. But those are the only predictions I have at this point. I think the same institutions that have been perennially powerful will continue to be that way. There's a lot of NCAA infractions, as you know, that have been levied against almost all of the schools. That's going to really change the landscape. And we at Texas Southern had the same problem, as you recall. We almost got the death penalty, but we were able to get through that by having a crack compliance office put in place. So I think when you see all the universities get hit by these NCAA infractions, I think the boards will start to respond, and the presidents have to start responding to making sure that kids who are eligible are on the field and not kids who are ineligible. And you got to have a great compliance program to do that.
And speaking of that, Doc, but also with the new NCAA, basically speaking of the NCAA, with the new transfer situation and transfer policies, do you foresee that being a problem, or better yet, a benefit to especially the SWAC conference? With students being able to transfer so freely and so easily now?
Well, yeah, I've always been a believer. When I played basketball way back in the day, when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and all these guys played, they had so many rules that you couldn't go anywhere or do anything, and it was basically rules that were designed to help the institutions and at the expense of the athlete. Now the tables have turned, and I think it's appropriate if the kid is not having a good experience in the institution that they're in. They should be allowed to go to an institution that wants them and not be put in a position where they're being held hostage by a coach or administration that just want to sit them on a bench and really ruin their opportunities to be the best that they can in their sport. So I really believe the one and done thing, even even Krzyzewski and all the other big time basketball coaches have recognized that it's going to be one and done from here on out.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good because when you see this last draft, 18-year-old millionaires here this one student, I'd say all of Duke's forwarded their starting players they're 18 years old, right? By the time they're 19, they're multimillionaires. So why not?
Well, Dr. Rudley, again, thank you for your time and your candor with this. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate this.
I appreciate you. And anytime you want to call upon me, I'm available.
Thank you, Dr. Rudley, and we'll be back with more HBCUbiquity.
Before we get back to the HBCUbiquity podcast, let's take a look at some Tom Joyner Foundation fundraising highlights. Here's an example of TJF's success.
My name is Connor Daly. I'm a sophomore at Dillon University, majoring in urban studies and public policy from Chicago, Illinois. I'm grateful for the scholarship from the Dillon University National Alumni Association and the Tom Joyner Foundation. After graduating from Dillon University, I plan to go to graduate school and receive a master's degree in public administration.
To donate to the Tom Joyner Foundation, just log on to www.tomjoynerfoundation.org and you can help a student continue their education at a HBCU.
Welcome back to HBCUbiquity. I'm your host, Thomas Joyner Jr. So yeah, today's conversations took some unexpected twists and turns, and that's a good thing. There are lots of topics and controversies and concerns that you might have heard going on in various corners of the HBCU world. And from time to time, you want to use this podcast to bring those issues to the forefront. So today was, as far as I'm concerned, a good conversation to have. I want to first thank Ms. Judy Cunningham, PR manager for the Ohio 529 College Advantage program. Her detailed explanation of the ins and outs and benefits of the 529 plan was useful, and hopefully I'm not the only one that learned a little bit more about how to save for college for children, grandchildren, that kind of thing. But I also want to thank our longtime good friend, the Tom Joyner Foundation, Dr. John Rudley. Today's conversation and the additional information and commentary about 529 plans was fantastic, but I did not expect the conversation to go into the current HBCU topics, but I can always count on Dr. Rudley for additional background information and from time to time, a different perspective on these issues. But to expand that conversation a little bit more, as is always the case during the summertime, this is a time of transition for colleges and universities in general, but for HBCUs in particular. A lot's happened during the week that this episode was recorded, and I want to share some more of those happenings with you. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Benedict College launched its first graduate school degree earlier this week. They'll be offering an MBA with 3 different concentrations. To hear more about Benedict College, as well as their phenomenal leader, Dr. Rosalind Artis, I encourage you to go check out last week's episode entitled State of HBCUs Part 1. And again, you can check us out on SoundCloud, iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, and of course, HBCUbiquitypodcast.com. In fact, while I'm plugging away, I want to make sure to let you guys know that if you have any thoughts or additional concerns, information, anything you want to share on any of today's topics, whether it was 529 plans or NCAA transfer rules or the Georgia mergers that we talked about, or anything else that we talked about, please find us on social media at HBCUbiquity, HBCUbiquity. Now, with that said, there are also more things that happened this week when it comes to HBCUs. We had a couple of leadership changes, so to speak. New leadership at Claflin University from our friend Juan Warmack, former president former president of Harris-Stowe University in St. Louis, Missouri, as well as the transition from Miles College to Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. Our longtime good friend of the foundation, Dr. George T. French Jr. He's going to do a phenomenal job at Clark. I think he's the right person at the right time for Clark Atlanta, and I look forward to, seeing what happens with him and McClark over the next couple years. As well as we also had some other transitions in Atlanta at the AUC. The Interdenominational Theological Center has replaced its current president, Dr. Edwin Wheeler, with a new president, Dr. Matthew Wesley. Look forward to seeing what he does as well. And we've had some more changes in HBCU leadership, especially with president stepping down at, unfortunately, Fayetteville State University. Another longtime good friend of the foundation, Dr. James Ammons, former chancellor of Fayetteville State University, as well as, and this one kind of troubles me even more, but earlier this week we had the resignation of Dr. Phyllis Worthy Dawkins at Bennett College. Dr. Dawkins did a phenomenal job over the last couple of years with getting Bennett back on the right footing. And to hear a lot more about that, I encourage you to go check out one of our very first episodes in this podcast, Bennett College and Accreditation. You can find that again on all platforms. But to hear about what she did, how she did it, and where she's positioned this college to go to for the future to maintain accreditation and, of course, grow, you need to check it out. But I wish her the best of luck, and I am no less optimistic about the Bennett Bells, my friends at Bennett College. I know the future looks bright for Bennett College, and I look forward to seeing that unfold. Again, if you have any suggestions for us for future topics or any feedback on this episode, please visit us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at HBCUbiquity. This is Thomas Joyner Jr. Thank you for joining us on today, and I really hope you come back next week for another exciting and very informative conversation, especially for those of you that are in search of sisterhood. Wink, wink. Thank you for listening to HBCUbiquity.